the fundamentals of storytelling, how the elements of story work together to create emerging narratives, characters, setting, plot, and tempo. Characters are the heart of any story. They are the individuals through whom the story unfolds, and often whom players identify with or empathise with. The best characters are complicated and multifaceted, with their own desires and motivations and challenges. Characters often experience growth or a change of sorts throughout a story, making their journey compelling. Some tips that I use when thinking about characters in a game context is that characters aren't just people. Characters are organisations or communities or a group of people sometimes. And whenever I'm creating a stakeholder or a character in a game, you want to make them three-dimensional. I often think about three things. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And most importantly, what's their motivation? What are they trying to do? It's very easy as a player to get into a character if you know what your aim is. Other things to consider are designing scenarios around that character that interacts with them, leading to the growth or the change, and make them relatable. Characters that can be easily related to are more easily role-played. The last thing that I like to do, which I find really useful, especially in games with multiple characters, spend a minute to think about what that character thinks about all the other characters. So usually I have a sheet and it has their strengths, their weaknesses, what their aim is, and then a little dossier, one sentence about how they think about the other characters. So it might be, your name is Bob, but you want to be the world's best scientist, and you don't like Regina because she doesn't believe in certain science. Very easy. Bob is now three-dimensional. The setting of a story encompasses the time and the place where it occurs. That talks about history or the context socially and the cultural backdrop. This affects the mood, the tone, and the events. Here try to create descriptions to put people there, giving nuances to immerse the players. Just a little thing. The room smells mouldy. There's some old graffiti on the wall. Can go a long way to making sure in a professional setting that they feel like they're actually doing something somewhere. And make sure you utilise the setting. Have it have influence over the plot and the characters. Speaking of the plot is the sequence of events that make up the story. It's the structure around a conflict or a series of conflicts that the characters navigate. Usually it follows a pretty conventional structure. You have an introduction where you set the scene and introduce the characters, a rising action which builds up to the conflicts and challenges, a climax or a turning point in the conflict, the consequences after the climax, and then the resolution. That's the most straightforward plot structure. However, those highs and lows and narrative beats keep the player engaged and also drive the story forward. Some tips here, I usually think about plot around a central conflict or some kind of challenge, the actual aim of what we're exercising. Some other things to consider with plot are subplots, so other minor goals or levels of complexity and depth, or surprise and levels of predictability. You don't want to throw in too much, but you want to balance surprises with predictability to keep players intrigued, but don't confuse them. This is where dice rolling and random tables shine in things like D&D. As long as it doesn't get in the way of the goal of the exercise, these things can be great. Make sure it supports the aim. The last thing I want to talk about is tempo. This isn't often talked about when it comes to story. Usually people focus on characters, setting, and plot. But I think tempo is absolutely key, especially in games. Tempo is the pacing or the speed at which things progress. It's the rhythm and the flow of the events and the information delivery. Tempo can be really fast and pressured, or it can be slow and more reflective. It can be used to build suspense or develop characters, focus on a particular thing, or amplify an emotional impact of something. Varying the tempo can keep the narrative dynamic even when the story is not complex. Gradually increasing and releasing tension and the stakes as the game progresses, as well as including moments of reflection or times to inject information to help players digest and understand things, is really important. Tempo is often the area where novice game masters also stuff up a little bit, or don't quite have the steering wheel of. Also has to do a little bit with time management. Delivering things too quickly all at once can overwhelm people. And it's not just about how much information someone gets, it's the order and the tempo of how they get it that changes their experience. Likewise, if things are too slow, it can really grind down things. I personally think that in tabletop exercising and in games, The players can have a really interesting and good experience, even if the characters are boring, even if the plot is boring, if the tempo is masterful. I think it's probably the hardest of these to get mastery of, but when you have a firm grasp on tempo and the things that you can do to adjust it, it can create a rich and immersive experience and invoke a whole heap of emotions. Each of these elements interacts with each other: character, setting, plot, and tempo. It's worthwhile thinking of each of these and how they interact with each other to form a cohesive and compelling story. Storytelling is really an art that combines creativity with structure and intuition of the techniques, but with practice you can get better. So I've got 2 little homework tasks for you in developing your game. The first is creating 3 to 4 stakeholder characters. Just give them a name and a motivation. Don't worry about strengths and weaknesses. What is their goal? What do they want to achieve? And then, what do they think about each other? So you'll have 4 little pieces of paper, 1 for each character. Each of them has a motivation, and each of them has the 3 other characters on it and what that person thinks about them. Thanks for watching. These lessons will be dropping weekly on YouTube, but if you want to get them all right now, you can take the foundation course for free on our website, where you will also get the lesson notes, summaries, assignments, checklists that guide you through all the learning objectives we've covered. At the end of that course, you'll also get a certificate of completion and an invite to our directory and community, where you can meet some other game masters and use the Long Game Project as a platform to showcase your work. If you want to take your game mastery further, completion of this course is a prerequisite to unlock the advanced professional course, along with the Game Master track, where we dive deeper into the content and further along the skill tree. You can also check out some of our other free tools in the description below, including our tabletop exercise starter kit, our scenario generator, the trove of existing scenarios, our SOP checklist library, and our new RPG character sheet, CV, and LinkedIn template, which is really cool. I did mine this morning, and now all my network knows that my dump stat is probably Dex, and I'm definitely neutral good. Roll on.